The best budget graphics cards are more than capable of delivering excellent performance without breaking the bank. Not every PC user needs the most powerful GPU available or the latest hot releases, after all. And if you're looking for something for casual gaming, light video editing, or general use, these budget GPUs are you for. After researching the market, we have come up with the top 5 best budget graphics cards in the market. They will do what they are intended for and some more. So without further ado, let's start with the video. And don't forget to check the product link in the description. Number 1. Radeon RX 6950 XT. The Radeon RX 6950 XT currently represents the ultimate in performance from the RDNA2 architecture, surpassing the old RX 6900 XT by about average. AMD set the MSRP at a rather high at launch. The RX 6950 and 6900 XT are basically the same GPU. The Sapphire RX 6950 XT Nitro Pure boasts some of the fastest non-ray tracing results we've ever seen. Technically, the RTX 3090 still wins at 4K Ultras, but 1080p and 1440p go to AMD, for a bit more than half the cost of NVIDIA's latest tour de force. The main drawback is that AMD's RDNA 3 architecture should arrive before the end of the year, providing even better performance and features. After numerous leaks and rumors, the AMD Radeon RX 6950 XT has arrived, accompanied by the Radeon RX 6750 XT and RX 6650 XT. With faster memory, higher GPU clocks, and a modest increase in power consumption, AMD's fastest can go toe-to-toe with NVIDIA's fastest and come out with some key wins. 4K and ray tracing still favor NVIDIA, but at nearly twice the cost, it's difficult to justify moving up to the RTX 3090. Nevertheless, for anyone who wants maximum AMD performance, the 6950 XT ranks as the best graphics card from Team Red and even takes over the top position in our GPU benchmarks hierarchy, at least for the traditional ranking. The higher power limit also comes into play, and while Sapphire didn't specify an official TBP typical board power and only gave TGP total graphics power, which only measures the power consumed by the main GPU chip, all told we'd expect performance to be about than the 6900 XT. As we'll see in a moment, the 6950 XT delivers much higher performance. Number 2. Radeon RX 6700 XT. The Radeon RX 6700 XT delivers good performance, and the official price looks reasonable. It's doubtful AMD will meet the demand at launch, but long-term this should prove a competitive offering in the GPU market. AMD made some serious cuts with Navi 22 compared to Navi 21, with half the potential CUs and shader cores. That's the biggest change, but there are others. The Infinity cache checks in at 96 MB now, smaller than on Big Navi. Similarly, there are now 6 32-bit memory interfaces instead of 8 interfaces, which reduces bandwidth. AMD compensates for the hefty reduction in core counts by delivering the highest official GPU clock so far, with a game clock rated at 2424 MHz, and like other RDNA2 chips, it can and often will exceed that in gaming workloads, with a maximum boost clock of 2581 MHz. The RX 6700 XT's clock speed represents a bit of an interesting compromise. To push clocks into the 2.5 GHz range, AMD had to increase the power limits. Considering the smaller die and reduced VRAM, normally we'd expect a pretty significant drop in power requirements compared to the RX 6800, but AMD lists a TBP of 230W. That's not bad, and it's certainly within reach of most modern gaming PCs as it only requires a decent 500W PSU. However, it's slightly more than NVIDIA's competing RTX 3060 and 3070 GPUs. Navi 22 actually looks very similar to NVIDIA's GA106 used in the recent RTX 3060 12GB. It has the same amount of memory and a similar die size, slightly larger, for AMD due to the Infinity Cache. Had AMD kept clock speeds closer to 2.25 GHz, it probably could have shaved off a decent amount of power. Certainly less than 200 W is possible. AMD apparently felt sacrificing some efficiency to boost performance was the better course. Number 3. Radeon RX 6600. The AMD Radeon RX 6600 officially starts at the same price point as NVIDIA's RTX 3060. It uses a harvested Navi 23 chip, delivering lower performance than the RX 6600 XT. It's decent for 1080p gaming. The Radeon RX 6600 takes everything good about the 6600 XT and then scales it back slightly. It's about slower overall, just a bit behind the RTX 3060 as well. That's a lot less than AMD's official MSRP, which felt somewhat high at launch than we ever saw those prices in meaningful quantities until recent months. But with cards now shipping well below MSRP, this represents the market's best overall bang for the buck. Mid-range graphics cards are a competitive arena, and the RX 6600 goes up against both the RTX 3050 as well as previous generation RTX 20 series and GTX 16 series GPUs. It ended up delivering near RTX 2070 performance in our testing, at least in non-ray tracing scenarios. With ray tracing enabled, however, it struggled badly, barely averaging 30 frames per second in our XDR test suite at 1080p medium and trailing NVIDIA's RTX 2060 by. It is one of the best graphics cards. A lot of that will depend on retail pricing and availability, as GPU prices remain inflated, but supply has been a bit better on the RX 6600 XT than on other RDNA 2 graphics cards, so hopefully, for gamers, AMD can supply a reasonable quantity of GPUs for this launch. Besides reducing the CU count and reducing the GPU clocks by a relatively large 315 MHz, if you look at the game clock, AMD also reduced the GDDR6 speed from 16 gigabits per second to 14 gigabits per second. Note that the maximum boost clock of 2491 MHz, technically the GPU, can exceed even though the boost clock is quite a bit higher than the game clock, so we'll have to see how it all plays out in the benchmarks. Number 4. GeForce RTX 3060. The GeForce RTX 3060 beats last year's RTX 2080 Super and costs less. It's a great option for the GPU market, though once again we expect it will sell out quickly for the next couple of months. The NVIDIA GeForce RTX 3060 brings the entry price for Ampere GPUs down, because apparently the GeForce RTX 3070, GeForce RTX 3080. The fact that this is now the best price-to-performance ratio in GPU land makes it one of the best graphics cards, and it currently occupies the 7th place on our GPU benchmarks hierarchy, not counting any Titan cards. The RTX 3060 and 3070 use the same GA104 GPU. You get the same 8 GB of GDDR6 memory, clocked at the same 14 gigabits per second. Meanwhile, the GPU core has 38 SMs enabled, versus 46 SMs on the 3070, making the 3060 theoretically around 17% slower. Clock speeds also factor in a bit, as the boost clock on the 3060 is 3.5% lower, so in general, the largest performance gap will be about 20%, and as we'll see, it's often quite a bit less than that. AMD's RX 6700 XT and RX 6650 XT give the 3060 some stiff competition. NVIDIA's part is still faster than the 6650 XT, and unequivocally faster in ray tracing games, but the RX 6650 XT currently costs about less. The RX 6700 XT meanwhile gives you more memory, higher performance in standard games, and costs less. The specs tell the same story relative to the previous generation NVIDIA Turing GPUs. The 3060 has quite a bit more theoretical compute performance than the RTX 2080 Super, and more than doubles the compute performance relative to the RTX 2060 Super. It has all the same features as the other 30 series GPUs, with a starting price of just in time for the next-gen GPUs to launch. Number 5. GeForce RTX 2060. The GeForce RTX 2060 sets forth to change minds on both fronts. It lands below the GeForce GTX 1070's launch price. And yet, the geometric mean of its average frame rates shows the GeForce RTX 2060 to be faster than GeForce GTX 1070. Recent updates to Battlefield 5 make NVIDIA's hybrid rasterization real-time ray tracing approach playable on lower-end hardware. We averaged 68 frames per second in 2060 through our benchmark at 1920 by 1080 with graphics options, including XDR reflection quality, set to Ultra. GeForce RTX 2060 Founders Edition finds itself surrounded by capable competitors in the GeForce GTX 1070, GTX 1070, Radeon RX Vega 56, and Vega 64. It largely outperforms them all and at a lower price point. The controversy surrounding NVIDIA's Turing graphics architecture seems to split into two camps. On one hand, critics are generally dissatisfied with the way GeForce RTX 20 series cards are priced compared to previous gen boards. Or, they're unhappy NVIDIA committed so many resources to future-looking features that may not have a big visual impact or run smoothly, except on ultra-high-end models. The version of TU-106 used on RTX 2060 boasts 83% of the 2070's CUDA cores, Tensor cores, and RT cores, 75% of its ROPs, a memory bus, GDDR6, and L2 cache, and operates at 98% of its GPU boost clock rate. Yet, at 2060 sells for roughly 60% of the RTX 2070 Founders Edition's price. By the numbers, this card's value story is bound to be a lot better. The top of this card is far less interesting than the 2080 Founders Edition or 2080 Founders Edition. Because 2060 does not support SLI over NVLink, there is no interface up there. Further, auxiliary power input moves to the back, presenting a cleaner aesthetic in windowed cases.